Ryugin. The Moaning of Dragons by Dogen. From Shobogenzo, the Treasury of the True Dharma Eye. Great Master Jisai of Tozusan Mountain in Joshu, the story goes, is asked by a monk, among withered trees, does the moaning of dragons exist or not? The master says, I say that inside of skulls exists the lion's roar. Talk of withered trees and dead ash is the original speaking of non-Buddhists. But the withered trees of which non-Buddhists speak, and the withered trees of which Buddhist patriarchs speak, may be very different. Even though non-Buddhists talk of withered trees, they do not know withered trees. How much less could they hear the moaning of dragons? Non-Buddhists have thought that withered trees might be trees in decay. They have understood that withered trees cannot meet spring. The withered trees of which the Buddhist patriarchs speak are the learning and practice of the sea having dried. The sea having dried is a tree having withered, and a tree having withered is the vivid state of meeting spring. A tree not being disturbed is the withered state. The mountain trees, ocean trees, sky trees, and other trees of the present are just withered trees. Even a sprouting bud is the moaning of dragons among withered trees. Even a tree of 100,000 myriad fathoms is the descendant of withered trees. The form, nature, substance and energy of the withered state are the withered stumps which Buddhist patriarchs have described, and are other than withered stumps. There are trees in mountains and valleys, and there are trees in fields and villages. Trees in mountains and valleys are usually called pines and oaks. Trees in fields and villages are usually called human beings and gods. Leaves spread out from roots. We call this state a Buddhist patriarch. Root and branch should return to the fundamental. This is just learning of the state. What exists in the state like this is the long Dharma body of a withered tree, or the short Dharma body of a withered tree. Those who are not withered trees never moan the moaning of dragons, and those other than withered trees do not get rid of the moaning of dragons. However many times this withered tree meets spring, it does not change its mind. This is the moaning of dragons that has become totally dry. It does not belong on the scale do, re, mi, fa, and so. At the same time, do, re, mi, fa, and so are 2 or 3 former and latter instances of the moaning of dragons. That being so, this monk's expression, among withered trees, does the moaning of dragons exist or not? Which has been realized as a concrete question for the first time in countless kalpas, is the realization of a comment in itself. Tosu's words, "I say that inside of skulls exists the lion's roar," mean, is there anything that is covered? They mean the effort to curb ourselves and to promote others is ceaseless. And they mean skulls are littering the whole countryside. Great Master Shuto of Kyogenji Temple, the story goes, is asked by a monk, "What is the truth?" The master says, "The moaning of dragons among withered trees." The monk says, "I do not understand." The master says, "Eyes in skulls." Thereafter, a monk asks Sekiso, "What is the moaning of dragons among withered trees?" Sekiso says, "A trace of joy still being retained." The monk says, "What are eyes in skulls?" Sekiso says, "A trace of consciousness still being retained." On another occasion, a monk asked Sozan, "What is the moaning of dragons among withered trees?" Sozan says, "The bloodline being unbroken." The monk says, "What are eyes in skulls?" Sozan says, "Dryness being without limit." The monk says, "I wonder if there are any who are able to hear." Sozan says, "Over the whole earth there is no one who does not hear." The monk says, "I wonder what words the dragons moan." Sozan says, "Even without knowing the words, those who hear all share the loss." The listeners and moaners we are discussing now are beyond the level of moaners who moan about dragons. This melody is the moaning of dragons itself. Among withered trees and in skulls are beyond inside and outside, and beyond self and others. They are the moment of the present, and the moment of eternity. A trace of joy still being retained is horns growing further on a head. A trace of consciousness still being retained is skin having been shed completely. Sozan's words, "The bloodline being unbroken," describe the truth being non-inimical, and the body being turned around in mid-speech. Dryness being without limit is the sea having dried, and the bottom not being reached. because not reaching the limit is dryness itself. In the state of dryness, we continue to dry, saying, "Are there any who hear?" is as if to say, "Are there any who cannot?" Over the whole earth there is no one who does not hear. I would like to ask further, setting aside for a while, there is no one who does not hear. Tell me, before the whole earth exists, where then is the moaning of dragons? Speak at once, speak at once. I wonder what words the dragons moan. We should ask this question. Moaning dragons are naturally a sound being voiced, or a matter being taken up in the mud. They are the passing of air inside the nostrils. We do not know what words these are, describes the existence in words of dragons. Those who hear all share the loss. How sorrowful it is. The moaning of dragons that has now been realized by Kyogen, Sekiso, Sozan, and others, becomes clouds and becomes water. Without speaking of the truth, without speaking of eyes or skulls, just this is the moaning of dragons in 1,000 melodies and in 10,000 melodies. A trace of joy still being retained is the croaking of bullfrogs. A trace of consciousness still being retained is the singing of earthworms. Relying on this state, the bloodline is unbroken, and a gourd succeeds a gourd. Because dryness is without limit, outdoor pillars gestate and give birth, and a stone lantern stands out against a stone lantern. Preach to the assembly under Yamashibu Peak in Etsu-u on the 25th day of the 12th lunar month in the first year of Kangen.